Welcome to the Spokesman Review Podcast, the latest way to stay up to date on news in the Lilac City. I'm reporter Kip Hill.
And I'm Spokane 7 writer Nathan Weinbender.
Coming to you from the Spokesman Review newsroom in the Review Tower in downtown Spokane.
This week, I'll have a one-on-one chat with George R.R. Martin, writer of the wildly popular Game of Thrones series of novels that has spawned an even more successful HBO series.
And we'll try to follow that act with some thoughts on Rolling Stone's recent list of the 100 greatest songwriters, one of whom will be in town this fall to play at Spokane Arena.
Thanks again to all who are tuning in on a weekly basis. You can download the podcast through SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher for all of your devices.
You can also keep up with the show by following our Twitter account at Spokane_podcast and on Facebook, facebook.com/Spokane Podcast, all one word.
Email the show with your thoughts, questions, and even some ideas if you have them at podcast@spokesman.com.
So, Nathan, we're going to go into your interview here with George R.R. Martin. You had a front page story that I thought was great, sort of illustrated, I think, the history of the con here in Spokane and how the con hasn't been here before, right?
No, WorldCon sort of hops around, and they actually vote at each WorldCon on which city is going to be the next host city. So if you go to WorldCon, you can actually, throw your hat in for whatever city you think that should be the next host city. And so Spokane was actually got enough votes somehow. So no, it's not come here before.
So but George R.R. Martin has been here before. What was he here for?
Briefly, it's talked about in the interview a little bit, so you will hear it coming up. But he was here for a different kind of convention about 25 years ago. He wasn't entirely sure on the details. So yeah, he's been here before, but his impressions of the city, were kind of non-existent because he was only here for a day or two and didn't really get to see, what the town has to offer. So yeah, but he has been here before.
Okay. So, talk to us a little bit about, we talked last week, you were kind of crossing your fingers about whether you'd actually get the interview. How did that come about? How did you get the interview?
Oh, just pure tenacity, I guess. Journalistic prying.
Yeah.
I just sent a message to the WorldCon people asking if it was possible to get an interview. They weren't even really advertising the fact that George R.R. Martin was coming. He was just in the list of all, 100 writers that were coming, and right there in the middle is George R.R. Martin. I sent out a message saying, is this true? Will he actually be here? He confirmed it in his blog that he was coming. And my message got forwarded along to his assistants. About 2 days before I actually talked to him, I got a call from one of his minions, he calls them, his assistants.
He calls them minions?
Yes, he does.
Were they yellow and wearing overalls?
Yeah, they speak in like a strange form of pidgin English. Anyway, and she contacted me a couple of days before he was actually going to be in town. I just assumed it was going to be a phone interview, and it turned out that they were offering a sit-down chat with George R. R. Martin in person.
Fireside chat with George R. R. Martin.
Yeah, right. I was not expecting that. So I went over to the new Davenport Grand a few days ago and went up to, I'm guessing it was his assistant's suite up on the 17th floor of the hotel. Really great view of the city. I got to talk to him for about 35 minutes. And we should say, too, that this is not the complete unabridged interview. I went through and cut out some stuff. So you're not hearing the total thing, but I think you'll get a good gist of what our conversation was like.
Great. Well, we'll look. We got it right here. We're not looking forward to it. It's right here. Let's go ahead and play that interview for you.
Well, first of all, thanks for sitting down and taking the time. I'm sure you have a very busy schedule the next couple of days.
Yeah, it's we try to keep it in range. I've been coming to this World Science Fiction Convention since 1971, and there were years where my schedule was very busy. I had like 3 or 4 panels every day, and breakfast meeting, lunch meeting, dinner menu. And finally, in the last 4 or 5 years, partly because of assistants like Rhea and other people who work for me, I've started actually saying no and discovered I can't say that. And so my conventions are a little more restful than they used to be.
You can kind of do what you want.
I do. Yeah, I only do them when I'm not so concerned with promoting myself. A lot of authors, this is a great opportunity to promote your work. And there are several hundred authors here, anywhere from old pros like me to kids who have just sold their first story or two. And, there's thousands of fans. You want to get your name out, and people wish you to do panels and to do readings and all that. But fortunately, this field has been good to me, and I don't need to do that anymore. I can just do things that are actually fun instead of having to jump through the hoops.
Right. And I was reading on your blog, you made a passing mention that you had been to Spokane before. Do you remember what the circumstances were? That
it was another convention. It was Spokane has or did, I don't know if they still do, but this convention is the WorldCon, which moves to a different city every year, and that's the big historic convention on the circuit. But many cities have regional conventions that they hold once a year, and Spokane had one, and I was guest of honor there. Probably around 1986, 87, something like that.
So it was a while ago. The city's changed a lot since you've been here.
Yeah, my recollections of it were...
So you don't remember what your impressions were of the city or anything like that?
Well, I remember one of my hosts that time, who was he was on the convention committee, but he was also a fireman for the city, and a nice guy. I don't remember his name or anything, but he took me out of the town into a wooded area with river and streams and scenic overlook kind of thing, and that was very pretty. I remember liking that. And then I remember, again, all the names have faded. My host took me to a hamburger place that had a famous local hamburger place.
Probably Dick's. Was it Dick's? Did you have to stand in line outside?
Yeah.
That was Dick's, yep.
Looked like there's no seating area really, just you stand in the window and it was, I remember, an excellent cheeseburger and fries, but that's about it. Those are my memories of Spokane.
That's not a bad memory, though.
Yeah, no, that was a good memory.
So, and I was also reading that you've counted this as your 41st WorldCon that you've been to. Is that number right?
Sounds about right, yes.
So since you've been going for so long, how would you say that the event in general has changed? Have you seen it evolve in any interesting ways beyond just the size of it?
The size of it has actually been remarkably stable since the 80s. When I first started going my first one was 1971. It was in a period of growth. It was growing substantially every year. And it grew pretty much from 71 to about 84. And in 84 it hit 8,000 people, which scared some of the organizers. Oh God, how big is this thing going to get? 8,000 people is too many. And they started pulling back and not advertising it and not really trying to get more people as they moved from city to city. And that produced a change because up to that point, WorldCon had been truly the biggest science fiction convention in the world. I mean, San Diego Comic-Con at that same time was like 5,000 when WorldCon was 8,000. And DragonCon, I don't think DragonCon had even been started yet, but if it did, it was drawing 1,000 or 2,000. Well, WorldCon put on the brakes, basically, and those conventions did. So, you've arrived at a situation where San Diego Comic-Con is now 150,000 people. DragonCon is 80,000 people. New York Comic-Con is 100,000 people, etc. And WorldCon is still 10,000 last year.
Right.
London set a new record.
Right.
London last year at 10,000 broke the record, had set in 84 by Los Angeles when it was 8,000.
Okay.
So, so WorldCon has been remarkably stable since the mid-'80s.
But it definitely seems like, sort of talking about this as sort of a mid-sized to smaller convention, at least in comparison to something like Comic-Con, which is this behemoth of a thing.
Right.
It definitely seems like there's sort of a camaraderie with this particular convention.
There is. It's like an annual family reunion.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think back to when I started coming to WorldCon in the 70s, and I had various groups of friends. I was just out of college, so I had my college friends who stayed I was living in Chicago at the time, and they were living in Chicago, they were still in school in Chicago. And I had that college friends. And then I had a job, a day job at a legal firm, and I had the people I worked with every day. They were the other Vista. I was a Vista volunteer, and the paralegals, and some of the young lawyers and the secretaries and all that. And we would party and go out to dinner.
Sure.
And I had my science fiction friends. So I had like 3 groups of friends in '71. And I look back now, and I've forgotten the names of most of the paralegals and the lawyer friends. I worked with them for 2 years, and then we separated. And the college friends, when I exchanged Christmas cards with the ones I know most, but I don't see them anymore.
Right.
Worldcon, all the science fiction friends I made are still my friends. They're still an important part of my life. We communicate. We used to correspond with letters, and now we correspond with emails, or some people use Facebook or whatever.
Right.
And I see them every year at Worldcon, and sometimes other conventions. So it's like we've gone from being kids together to being old together to, and it is really a community. It's a family that is very important to me.
And I mean, I don't want to talk too much, obviously, about the Hugo controversy, but I know that you've written about it, and I'm sure you're tired of talking about it. But do you expect any kind of animosity from it? Do you get the sense that people are going to show up and make a scene, or do you think it's going to be just kind of a blip on the radar and everyone kind of forgets about it? I mean, it's the elephant in the room, right?
It is. And that's a complicated answer. There's already been an enormous amount of animosity about it, more animosity than I have ever seen before. And that is a concern here at this convention, to what extent it will manifest. But I hope that it will be relatively minor, if it occurs at all. When I use the word fan, I'm a writer, but I'm also a fan. And the people at these conventions are fans. That means they are a member of the community that I describe, the community that had its roots in the 20s and 30s, the community that published fanzines, the community that went to conventions, that founded the Worldcon, that founded and built it up to what it is, that runs the regional conventions, that founded the Hugos, that loves the traditions and the histories of the fans. And, I can talk about writers and conventions that are, writers have been dead for 50 years and conventions that have been gone for 30 years. And it's a continuous thing. It's a community. When the other side, the people who instigated this controversy used the word fan, though, they just mean someone who likes science fiction or fantasy. And because it has taken over the world, that's everything. That's everyone almost, Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a science fiction fan. I like Star Trek. Right. I'm a science fiction fan. I went to see Guardians of the Galaxy. And yeah, they are in a sense, and they get very upset when people like me say, no, you're not fans. I don't mean anything bad about that. It's just they're not fans in the same sense.
Right.
They're using the word to mean different things. They like it, but they don't know anything about the community. Most of them have never been to a convention. They've certainly never been to a Worldcon, and they're not at this Worldcon. So the chance, it's not like 2 large groups of my kind of fan with different opinions are likely to clash in the halls, because 98% of the people here are from the traditional community.
Sure.
And that group doesn't go to the conventions. And that's part of what triggered this whole controversy. They want to determine who gets the Hugos, but they don't go to a convention that gives the Hugos. The Hugos belong to Worldcon. It always has. It's not the People's Choice Award where anyone who's ever watched a Star Trek episode gets to give their opinion.
Right.
It's the Oscars of science fiction. You have to be a member of the Academy to vote for the Oscars.
Right.
You have to be a member of Worldcon to vote for the Hugos.
Right.
So I don't think there's going to be much animosity, because there's simply not much of that side represented here. It's mostly all people who are part of traditional fandom. Now, there are 1 or 2 who will be here, and I hope they'll have a good time, and nobody will throw gasoline on the fire, and
right.
We won't leave any bodies in the halls. But there has been a lot of bad tempers and a lot of horrible things said on the internet. So,
I know.
So one doesn't know.
Well, let's get to a more optimistic, sort of nicer topic, then we'll get off of that. Let's sort of talk about the convention itself, this particular convention. Can you kind of explain what your schedule is going to be? I know you've got a couple of events that you're going to. You've got that conversation, the panel.
Yeah, I've got a conversation with Robert Silverberg where we're just going to be, reminiscing about, we're two of the older lights here, and Silverberg, a decade and a half older than me, so he's, I believe, the only one still living who's been at every Hugo Award ceremony.
Wow.
Going back to the first one in 1953.
That's crazy.
So, we're going to tell some stories and talk about the old. And there's a later panel on Sunday, which is on a similar theme about the community of science fiction and fantasy. In addition, I'm doing a reading of a chapter from The Winds of Winter, and I'm doing some autograph sessions. And am I doing anything else, Ray?
I think that's it officially.
Okay.
Well, so you're reading material that a lot of people want to know about.
I always do, yeah. Although it's a chapter I've read before, so it won't be brand new. Some people will be, there's nothing on the internet, It's like, I used to be able to give readings at conventions, and I'd read the same chapter at 8 different conventions, and they were on different continents, a different part. But now, even though I don't permit my readings to be recorded, people take notes. So, a half hour after I finish reading a chapter in Australia, there's a summarized version of it up on the internet. Right. And then when I read it 6 months later in Columbus, Ohio, it's like, oh, he just read the same thing that he just read in Australia. Well, I was on the other side of the world. I figured you guys wouldn't have heard it. But.
Well, it's not like you want to read a new chapter every time. Otherwise, they'll have the book before it's out.
Exactly. And that actually happened with, a couple of the previous books where every convention I went to, I didn't want to disappoint me. I keep reading a new chapter. And the book came out, half of this book is old stuff.
It's George R. R. Martin's greatest hits.
Yeah.
And you were kind of talking about the visibility that you have now, and that people are going to your meetings and taking notes, which that's insane that people do that, but they're dedicated. Now that the HBO show is out and has kind of major stuff, people are more aware that weren't aware before. You've become this big mainstream household name. Has that changed the way you write, or has it changed the way that you are going to release stuff, or you just kind of take it in stride and that's just sort of part of this whole journey that you've been on for the last 20 years now with this series?
It hasn't changed the way I write, but it's changed in some ways my ability to write. I mean, the demands of my time are endless. Before the TV show, even before the books were always popular, but before they became mega popular, I just ran my career and my business alone, as I had since the 70s. But then I hired an assistant because it got to be too much, and now I'm up to like 5 assistants.
Wow.
My minions, as they call me, and I'm still being buried by. I mean, Rhea is sitting there, going through mails that arrived today and requests for people who think it's urgent that I call them today on some matter, or emails that have to be answered right away, etc. And she's juggling all that, and she chooses to pass along some of it to me, and with recommendations, usually it's to say no.
And aren't you glad that she doesn't pass along everything to you, right?
I am, but I know I give her a hard time sometimes when she says no to something I actually want to do. What do you mean? How did you turn that down here? It was the Nobel Prize, Ray. We should have accepted it.
He's not interested. He'll be at Sasquatch.
Yeah. Well, and it's just, there's stuff. I mean, people who are not writers have this idea of writers just
sit down,
sitting in an ivory tower, making up stories and writing. And certainly that's the most key and essential part of it. But, writer's career, there's a lot of associated stuff. You have to keep your records. You have to keep up with your correspondence. You have to file the letters and the contracts and deal with your agents and deal with publicize the books and stories when they come out. And, your publicist is setting up interviews for you. There's all this other stuff. And, of course, you have to pay taxes. You have to fill in tax forms and deal with the accountants. And as you get more and more successful, this stuff gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's the impact that the success has had upon my writing. It's just, days I'd just like to concentrate and write, but my God,
You can't.
there are 17 urgent things that I need to take care of today, or at least things that the people on the other end think are urgent. And, I employ people like Rhea and Lenore and other people who say, nah, it's not that urgent.
And yet you probably get asked at least, I would say at least once a day, when's the new book coming out? I mean, people probably badger you like that when you're walking down the street, I would imagine.
Yeah, I get asked it a fair amount. The people who know me know better than to ask me that one, because I gave up answering that one years ago. But
right.
The first three came out in a shorter period of time. The first one, Game of Thrones, in 1996, and then the second one, 1999, which was, even back then, a lot of people complained of 3 years because most of the fantasists came out with a book a year. So the first one in 96, they expected the second one in 97. Didn't come out in 97, didn't come out in 98. I was getting restless things. But then I got that one out in 99, and I got the next one out in 2000. Maybe it gave
was it that quick?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
It gave them a false sense of how quick I could do
it up.
The other thing that's been happening, of course, between 96 and now is, in addition to getting more successful, I've also gotten older. I tried to avoid getting older, but it seems to happen anyway. And this series is bigger and the books are more complex. So, if anything, I've always been a slow writer, but if anything, I'm even slower now than I used to be. So that does frustrate people.
But hey,